in one of the hardest tournaments of the year, an LCQ where you have to go 5-0 to qualify, Magic Online gave me the wrong deck list. Okay, welcome back, Vintage Gamers, to a bit of a different video. This is going to be a re-recording or dubbing over of my matches in the first of 4 LCQs that are available for 2026. I'm going to be playing in 3 LCQs, and I don't know how many of them are going to get filmed and how they're going to get filmed, so that'll be more of a surprise than anything. But this was the very first one. I signed up for this thinking I was registering PO, but Magic Online decided I was registering this deck. What is this deck? This is a version of aggressive sphere shops that I was playing to grind QPs on Sunday. I did not mean to register this deck for the LCQ, but this is what we showed up with, and I don't hate this deck. It's just, it's not the choice I would have made. This is basically the version of sphere shops where I top 8'd recently, except I went with full cut the crucibles, add a bunch of metamorphs to try to compound on my lock pieces and my attacking pieces. So this is a very, very aggro slanted version of workshops with, still has the restrictive and interactive elements of Wasteland, Sphere, Null Rod, Thorn, Transfere, those kind of things. But it's definitely just trying to place one of those down and end the game as quickly as possible. I actually quite like this deck. It's like I said, it's not blue, so it doesn't fit my typical outing for a tournament I care about, but it's not like it's something I'm unaccustomed to, or I think it's like a meme deck or anything. This is a real deck that I actually think people could register and do very well with. And you're going to see today, I think quite well with it. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I have all of the rounds recorded with no video and audio, and I'm going to just do a dubbing over of them. We'll skip through so you don't have to wait between actions, and we'll just talk about any kind of interesting points along the way. These are workshop games, so really the most important parts are the mulliganing and the sequencing. There are a couple cool moments that I've already put in the Discord that I think are at least interesting to talk about and have some like ramifications on, different kind of pathways in the game. But overall, these are still workshop games, so some of them are going to be a little bit on the one-sided side. So hope you enjoy this run through 5 rounds of this lose and go home LCQ. I am happy to announce the dates for high-stakes, proxy-friendly Vintage in 2026. The legendary NYSE returns to Long Island in New York on June 6th. This $500 entry fee tournament will pay out 8 pieces of unlimited power. The Oklahoma Land Run returns in 2026 on July 10th through 12th at the Reed Convention Center in Oklahoma City. Play Friday Team Trios, Saturday Legacy for a Mox Sapphire, and Sunday Vintage for a Mox Emerald. Event links can be found in the description below. I hope to see you there. Let's battle. All right, here we are, round 1 of this LCQ. We're up against Mana Drain. I suspect Mana Drain here will be on Mono White Initiative. This hand is a turn 1 Lodestone into a Strip Mine, and I think that's probably good enough. If it was something else, then I would consider maybe not choosing that. Here you see me exiting my queues for all my other LCQs because I thought I was registered with PO, and I was actually registered with shops on all of them. So this is me in real time learning that I was playing shops for my LCQ. We're just going to hop around here, and we're not going to do too much waiting around. I keep my hand. My opponent keeps a 7. There is no Chancellor, and I slam a turn 1 Lodestone on the second spell. Don't want to get randomly Mindbreak trapped, just in case that would happen. Seeing as it does resolve, I'm going to resolve my other things to play around Void Mirror, and we're going to go to my opponent's turn. Here, my opponent leads with Plains and Lotus, and then plays Vexing Bauble. Very interesting start. You have to think both of these are not getting taxed, but every one of the mono white creatures is getting taxed. So this kind of signals, it depends on if my opponent is trying to resolve Vexing Bauble. I don't know how much like Vexing Bauble matters from this spot. It's kind of past the point of Vexing Bauble mattering. So like if they did have a 4-drop, you'd think they would lead on the 4-drop here. And by a 4-drop, I mean a 3-drop that costs 1 more. So it's a very interesting start. I'm not 100% sure what it meant. But my opponent did lead Plains, and I have a Strip Mine. So I get to Strip Mine my opponent, and then I get to slam a Trinisphere. So now my opponent really is only going to get to play maybe one more spell this game. A 3-mana spell that costs 4. That's probably the last spell my opponent gets to cast. They don't play a spell, which is quite interesting, which makes me think they have maybe a Seasoned Dungeoneer in their hand that costs 5. Sphere Resistance is really good because it's going to make Seasoned Dungeoneer cost 6. And, you know, Lowstone Golem is one of the best lock pieces of all time because it's got 5 power attached to it, 4 attacks, and it's done. So it's very, very strong. There's a reason it's restricted. My opponent does rip an Ancient Tomb, which is quite... might be the best possible card to have here. They might have had it in their hand, to be fair. But this gives them up to 6 mana, and with 6 mana, they can play a Seasoned Engineer through a Sphere and a Lowstone. And they play a Witch Enchanter. So, not a Seasoned Engineer, but I'm going to lose my Lowstone. My opponent is going to go to 8 life, has an Ancient Tomb and 3 mana, with a Trinisphere and a Sphere Resistance in play. We draw Scrawling Crawler. Obviously, quite a good draw, because we're looking to play multiple spells a turn with our mana. And so we're going to get that down. And then opponent no attack and no land drop. Our upkeep draw is a Serpent. And our draw per turn is a land. And so we're just going to cast the biggest Serpent possible on 8 mana. Not going to attack with Scrawling Crawler, as it's currently making my opponent's health lower. And they crack the bauble because they're at the end of the ropes here. And they don't find an answer to Stonecoil Serpent. So here we are in sideboarding. What am I looking for in sideboarding here? Dismember is the obviously coming in. Wormcoil Engine is probably coming in. And Stonecoil Serpent is like, okay. On the draw versus mono white, we don't really need Null Rod anymore because Null Rod only really going to be effective if we are on the play versus mono white. So here you see I'm thinking about bringing in Mindbreak Trap as well on the draw here, taking out Vexing Bauble, Chalice, Null Rod, Thorn of Amethyst, and Karn. All kind of a similar style of card here on the draw. And then we'll skip down to the game. And here's the game. I have an opening Trinisphere, Saga, Ancient Tomb, and Metamorph with a Wasteland. Quite strong. Very reasonable. I think I broke my playback. Yeah, here we go. So opponent reveals a Chancellor, which does make things bad. And then actually a similar start to the last time with Basic Plains Lotus and Clarion Conqueror turn 1. So my opponent still has a Chancellor and they have a turn 1 Clarion Conqueror. That's turning off our Mana Crypt. So here I have lots of different options, right? And by lots of different options, I mean I can't play anything off of my Mana Crypt anymore, and I can't Wasteland my opponent. So it's basically, do I want to play turn 1 Saga, see if my opponent has the Wasteland right away, and then try to go for Saga Ancient Tomb Life. And one thing I can do here is just cast my Mana Crypt to get rid of the Chancellor. So here you see me play this. Now I can actually choose either to keep the Mana Crypt as extra artifacts for my constructs, or I can let it go. I decided like 3 damage a turn might be worse than giving my constructs an extra +1/+1, especially if like I get Wastelanded right away. So I don't pay for the Mana Crypt. My opponent attacks for 3 and then has a Strip Mine. So Saga, no Saga Gaming, and they have a Stranded Pearl. So we've drawn a Sphere Resistance. So now I have Ancient Tomb comes in, and I can choose to whether or not to cast Sphere Resistance or not. I think if you cast Sphere Resistance, it's okay because you do have Ancient Tomb, so you can play a 3-drop on turn 4. One thing I have to worry about here, though, is that I have double Ancient Tomb, and I will be quickly losing my life total, which definitely, was good reason to not have kept the Mana Crypt. So I do play a Sphere because it is going to lock my opponent out of playing anything. But like I am now, priced into casting this Metamorph for 6 life. So I'm at 3, and this Clarion Conqueror is here to block Clarion Conqueror. I draw another thing that I don't really want to cast. So I'm going to play my Wasteland and pass. I don't really want to attack, but if I attack, my opponent will be able to free up their Pearl. They take it a Wasteland. They have an interesting target here. They chose the Ancient Tomb. And I think that's fine. Certainly going to keep me from casting one of my payoffs, but I do rip a Workshop. With the Workshop rip, I'm getting closer to Wormcoil Engine, but I'm not there yet. I'm only 6 mana out of 7 mana. So I'm thinking I will probably just play Scrawling Crawler or a Trinisphere at 4 mana. I don't think a Trinisphere matters at this point because my opponent's really not casting any spells. Even if they draw an Ancient Tomb, they have to, they still need to pay for the Sphere tax. So we might as well get our Scrawling Crawler in play to start drawing us to more Workshops so we can play Wormcoil and get out of this game. Opponent chooses to not attack again and has no land. So now we get to our turn where we're both going to draw for Scrawling Crawler. I'm going to draw Stonecoil Serpent and no land. Stonecoil Serpent for 3 is going to be something that blocks Clarion Conqueror. I might be supposed to do this post-attack. Probably supposed to do this post-attack. I don't know why I did it pre-combat. Oh, I'm going to go for the full 4. So that, 5. So I took 2 damage to go for the full 5 for the Stonecoil Serpent. And then I'm offering the Clarion Conqueror trade. And I'm also offering the Scrawling Crawler trade. Because I'm trying to end this game as fast as possible because I really can't cast too many more spells. I still think so like, I don't actually know why I did this pre-combat. Because I'm not gaining any buff here. So just to look like an error, I think I should be doing that post-combat. But they, of course, going to free up their Mox Pearl, which is quite good for them. Because now if they draw an Ancient Tomb, they actually do have 4 mana to cast through Sphere Resistance. They have a Cavern of Souls, but they can't play a 3-drop right now because there's still a Sphere Resistance, which means I'm getting another card, dealing another damage, finding another Workshop, attacking for 8, and then using my Workshop to play another Stonecoil for 5. Opponent loses another life and then dies. So just kind of getting out to a bit of an advantage, which is interesting because our opponent did have like a Plains Lotus draw on both of these games, but we were able to kind of stifle, this one was like Clarion Conqueror follow-up. They had to use their lands to get rid of Saga. And this one was just, the Lodestone into Trinisphere plus the Strip Mine. I guess Strip Mine on basic planes was enough to like keep my opponent from casting too many spells. And I actually think Scrawling Crawler was quite good here because it was a way to get multiple spells per turn. I think over the course of this event, Scrawling Crawler did pretty well, to be perfectly honest. I'm always even if I make fun of the card a lot, I think there's obviously some merit to why it might work in the deck, and especially when you do 2 things that this deck is doing. 1, you're playing Metamorph, so you can compound Crawler with more Crawlers. And 2, you are adding a very heavy focus in attacking elements to kind of negate the downside of each opponent drawing cards. So a nice round 1 victory here against Mono White. Okay, right into round 2. I unfortunately did not get the beginning of this game, but I kept this 7-card hand of Null Rod, Ancient Tomb, Patchwork, Mox, Wasteland, Workshop. I got a pretty reasonable hand of Ancient Tomb, Patchwork, Mox, Null Rod. I think it's 4/4 Patchwork, a possible Null Rod, Wasteland to follow up. I like it a lot. I'm up against X-File, who's going to be on Lurrus PO. So I kept this hand, and then my opponent led with Saga, Mana Vault, Black Lotus. And now I think that's a very telling opener because opponent does have Lurrus. They could buy Lurrus, play Lurrus, replay Lotus if they wanted to. So you have to think, what does it mean? Why does my opponent not choose to go Lurrus, replay Lotus? And to me, I think it means that they have Force. And so I'm going to play my turn a little bit awkwardly because I want to try to play around Force on my Null Rod. I want to play around Force on my Null Rod. And if I don't think I'm going to resolve Null Rod, then I want to be able to wasteland this Saga because I don't think I'm going to be able to beat Saga tokens from here. So I think I play this turn a little interestingly. I can't remember exactly. It might be like Mox, Null Rod, see if it gets forced, and then Wasteland if it doesn't get forced. I think that's something I did. Yeah, so Mox, Null Rod. So like I'm not maximizing my Patchwork here, but I'm trying to maximize my chances to deal with my opponent's current board. The Null Rod resolves, so now I don't see any reason to Wasteland Saga. Basically, the only way my opponent can make Saga tokens is if they have Tolarian Academy. So I'm going to, instead of playing Wasteland now, I'm just going to play Workshop and play Patchwork plus Pearl, get a 2/2 down. Obviously, my opponent untaps and plays Tolarian Academy, which makes 2 mana, so they can make a Construct token. But it's still not a big a deal because I do have a Wasteland. So I think I can beat 1 Construct token here. What I'm going to do is not Wasteland the Saga. I'm going to Wasteland the Tolarian Academy, keep them off of mana. They're going to get a Construct, and they're going to, this Saga is going to search for something, but it's not going to really matter because they're not going to be able to use it through a Null Rod. Kind of the downsides of Saga. So here, I Wasteland the Academy. They get a 3/3. So right now, they're outsizing me, but over time, I think I should be able to get bigger. They lose their Saga, and he gets just a... this is a nice little play, I think, from X-File. He gets a Soul Guide Lantern to hit my Wasteland so he can't get Crucibled. I don't have Crucible in my deck, but it's reasonable to assume I do. My opponent does use the floating mana and a Tundra from hand to play a Thundertrap Trainer, and Thundertrap Trainer has 4th Air Lingus, which is kind of an interesting card here. If my opponent has an additional fetch land, they can play a 4th Air Lingus for 0 and attack with both creatures and take the initiative, or the Monarch. So Construct token comes in, hits me, and I draw Nettlecyst, which is one of my best draws immediately. It's going to outsize their Construct. It's going to pump my Patchwork. I can't equip it, obviously, but great draw. So it's a 6/6 immediately. I can get in for 3, start the beatdown. I don't think it's worth holding back here, even though they have 4 Therilingas, because they have to sacrifice their construct token to get the initiative, or the Monarch. And I don't think that's worth it, so I'm okay with leaving this back. What does happen is my opponent has one of the main deck swords. You're seeing 0 to 2 swords played in main decks of Lurrus PO right now. Maharu build plays 2 main deck. Mine sometimes plays 0, 1, or 2, depending on what I think the metagame works. So here is 4 and 1, 5 damage, but we gain 6 life from our Nettle Cyst. So drawing an extra workshop means I don't have a lot going on, and I'm attacking for 3. Now I feel like I can't hold back, because if they do have 4 Therilingas, like I'm not even getting a good block. I'm really only getting a trainer, and I think it's not even that good. So I'd rather just get the damage in. They don't actually have the other land, though, so they're just attacking for 5 and passing back, and I rip a Stonecoil Serpent, which is pretty sick. I'm going to play my land here and play a Stonecoil Serpent for a full 10 Stonecoil Serpent. Resolves, and it gets me another additional 4 damage in with the Patchwork, but they do have the second main deck swords for the Stonecoil Serpent, so I do lose the Stonecoil Serpent. They are going to get another attack in a bit, maybe, though they're at 10 life, and I gain 10 from my 10/10 Stonecoil Serpent. I actually can't remember what happens from here. My opponent plays a Mox to get an extra damage in here with the Construct token. Obviously, they're not going to hold back this Construct token, because if I draw an artifact, then I have a 5/5 and we're trading, and it's not really a great outcome for them. So they're going to try to get me down. And then I draw a Metamorph. This is kind of like a nice spot where the extra Metamorphs have been quite good. So here a Metamorph comes down. I can either copy a Construct or a Nettle Cyst. They're pretty similar unless I draw an Urza Saga, in which case Nettle Cyst will be +1. So I'm just going to copy Nettle Cyst and then attack for 5. My opponent's at 5, and I have 2 lethal attackers. They're going to have to leave them both back to block, and then I rip a Mystic Forge here, which is going to send us into game 2. Sideboarding for Lurrus PO, slightly different here. I have these 3 traps that I'm interested in. I'm not really interested in losing my Stonecoil Serpents, because they actually have protection from Flame of Venor, which is quite nice. But I'm also like not 100% sure I want all of my traps. So here you can see me like playing around with like Metamorphs. The reason I'm thinking about Metamorphs is because Metamorph requires me to have something else in play for it to be good. And, you know, if opponent's playing 4 swords and Flame of Venor, you might just not have access to those things that you can copy. And it would be the worst case scenario would be like in a top deck war, you draw a Metamorph and you have nothing to copy. Here I have a very nice opener: Ancient Tomb, Sphere, Wasteland, Null Rods. My opponent does have a Black Lotus start, and so I have some options here on what I want to respond with. Drawing a second Null Rod definitely helps, because it means if I get countered, I can just play another one. I don't want to put down Sphere or Thorn too early, in case I don't have the mana to get out from under my own Sphere and Thorn. So here I'm just going to run a Null Rod and see how it lands. Does it resolve? Does it get countered? And what my opponent has is a Consigned to Memory, quick, clean, and easy counter, and getting an island that's wasteland proof. So very good start from my opponent. They probe, they get to see what my hand is. So now we're in a pretty rough spot, because we haven't really produced any kind of advantage here. My opponent has easily 1/1 to us, and then they over the top, they play Ancestral. So not great. This is Black Lotus, though, first knock-up, which I think is quite reasonable for us. Obviously, they're going to get cards that they want, but they lose a huge amount of mana, which is quite nice. So I think it makes sense for them to, you know, crack this stock up, especially if they probe and see my Null Rod and think they don't have like a direct way to deal with it. You don't want to like let your Lotus be stranded. So I see a tapped Thundering Falls, and they keep the card on top. I'm still kind of in just kind of a dire spot, because I just don't have a lot of ways to get advantage. So they don't have any artifacts in play, so I'm thinking Null Rod doesn't really make a lot of sense. Maybe I'll just go for Sphere Resistance and see if it resolves. If it does resolve, then Wasteland gets a little bit more effective, so we'll go for the Wasteland. So Sphere resolves, Wasteland happens, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe we're actually in an okay spot. My opponent does follow it up immediately with a Mox and another land. And so now I'm thinking, well, I guess we probably need to get this Null Rod down. But kind of makes more sense to keep taxing. If I play a Thorn of Amethyst for 3, I can still play my Null Rod. One of the problems here, though, is you've noticed once again I've drawn 2 Ancient Tombs, and my life total is dwindling very quickly. So instead I just try to slam the Null Rod here to try to choke my opponent as much on mana as I possibly can. It does resolve, and it goes to my opponent's turn. Because the thing I'm worried about here is my opponent getting up to Flame of Venor mana, and then that would be a really hard place to come back from. So my opponent does have another land. Every land they draw is worse for me, and I drew another Ancient Tomb, so I really don't have that many more ability, much more ability to cast spells in this game. I only have a few more activations, so I kind of get a little bit on the greedy side. I'm not like super greedy. Like I could go Ancient Tomb play a 5-mana Lodestone Golem, but I go for somewhere in between that, casting a Scrawling Crawler off of 2 Ancient Tombs. Resolves, I play another Ancient Tomb, but I'm in trouble. I'm at 8 life. I have only Ancient Tombs. My opponent is slowly gaining lands to play spells. And here you see Snapcaster Mage for nothing, which is a really bad sign because it means my opponent is probably going to go land Flame of Venor with Snapcaster Mage killing my Null Rod and my Scrawling Crawler. And they have a land, and they have a Flame of Venor. And like if you get to the point where you're getting Flame of Venor in this matchup, you are dying. So you're just all about locking your opponent out and their ability to play Flame of Venor. So they actually don't go for kill Scrawling Crawler, kill Null Rod. They don't really care about that. They just go for kill Crawler, draw 2, which is fine. They have plenty of life to give. And I'm at, I lose 2 life from the Snapcaster attack, and I can't even really play anything. So obviously I can't play Lodestone Golem, so I just try to play a Nettle Cyst, and they have another follow-up, this time with an Abrade killing my Nettle Cyst. So that, combined with the Ancient Tomb damage that I took and the Snapcaster Mage attack, puts me to 0. So we go to game 3. I want to take these traps back out and try to put these Metamorphs in to try to just compound on my hate pieces. I don't know if this is like correct or anything, but my idea was being on the play. I don't need the Mind Retract as much because I'm going to keep a hand that has some kind of way to stop my opponent from deploying their mana. So I go with that. And then from here, I have a nice little opener. Ancient Tomb again, but I have a Null Rod, I have a Sphere, I have a Lodestone, and I have a way to compound it with the Metamorph, so I think it's very reasonable. One thing I don't have in these recordings is mulligans, so we'll have to keep an eye out on like the top left and see if we know if our opponent mulligan. Our opponent mulliganed to 6 here, and I led with Null Rod. I think it's more effective than leading with Sphere in case my opponent goes like land mox. Here's a Volcanic. Here's a Black Lotus, so I'm very happy I put a Null Rod down. I've had a lot of opponents with Null Rod draws here. Notably, my opponent does have Consign mana up, something to think about. I assume from this spot I would just go... So I have an option to go Chalice on 1 or Chalice on 0, but I think it's still correct to go Chalice on 0 because it's just a way to compound hate pieces and make sure that you don't lose one lock piece and then everything falls apart. So instead, I try to go Chalice on 0 plus Lodestone. I think it's just like the highest power level play. And I think this Null Rod on Lotus basically stopped my opponent from being able to do whatever they wanted to do here, and there's no follow-up land, so I take that as a go sign. Here, I play a Sphere as the next hate piece, because this way, if my opponent does force it, which they can do, they can pay 1 for the force, I can just drop another Sphere anyways. And if the Sphere resolves, then it's not even that bad that my Sphere, I can't play my second Sphere because... it means they're not casting anything through Lodestone and Sphere. So here now I have Lodestone and Sphere. I have a 4-turn clock with my Lodestone Golem, and it's quite easy. And then because I have 4 mana, I can still play my Metamorph. And Metamorph plus Lodestone is a great impression of unrestricted Lodestone. Now I will have 2 Lodestones, I'll have 10 power, and my opponent's spells will all cost 3 more, and their artifacts can't be used. So this is kind of like textbook clean Shop's gameplay, really capitalizing on my opponent's reliability, relying on artifact mana and getting round 2 against Lurrus PO. Onward to round 3 of this LCQ, up against this player who had some Lurrus Doomsday and normal Doomsday in their repertoire. So that was the deck I had put them on based on looking at their history. They did reveal Lurrus, and I have a very nice hand, Ancient Tomb Soul Ring, Null Rod, Crawler, Patchwork, Lodestone, and Karn. Obviously, I can't play all of these cards, but I have options. So I see if the Soul Ring resolves first, which it does, and then I decide to play Crawler as the best use of my mana, try to draw more land so I can play my more interactive hate pieces. Obviously, Crawler is not as strong as like playing a Lodestone or something. Obviously, I don't have the mana to play Lodestone, but I don't want to Null Rod and then be stuck behind on mana, and I think Crawler is going to do a little bit better for me here than Patchwork. And Crawler is still like a little bit of a hate piece against, the Psychic Frog, Preordain, Ponder deck. So I think it's pretty reasonable. I draw a Metamorph off of my Crawler and Jet for turn. That's at least something to start pressuring my opponent here. So Patchwork first so I can get my triggers, and then Jet, and then I assume I'm going to try to Metamorph onto my Crawler. Try to compound the Crawlers, make them cascade with each other here, and put a lot of pressure on my opponent. This is probably like a must force, I would think, if you had a force, because having 2 crawlers in play sounds quite hard to Doomsday combo through. So what my opponent does is they cast a Mana Consultation for Force of Will, because they need to make sure they counter this Metamorph. So the consult resolves. You can see over here what they lost. They lost Time Walk, 2 Doomsday, 4 Dark Ritual, Ancestral Recall, 2 Moxen, Frog. Couple things, but we have a crawler in play still. They're at 13 life. We've got 3 additional power and some hate pieces along the way. So we're in a totally reasonable spot. Opponent does play Frog because they are on the Lurrus Doomsday, which is going to stop my attack. My opponent has 5 cards in hand, so this thing could become very large very quickly. But thankfully, Scrawler does its job and draws us into lands, especially Wastelands. And so what I'm going to do here is look to cut my opponent off of mana as much as I physically can. So Lodestone Golem on the stack. My opponent gushes in response, which means I won't be able to wasteland them. But I think they're just like desperate to find a force. Opponent made some interesting plays in this game. It's really hard to tell because I don't know their hand. But because I don't need to wasteland anymore, what I can do is I can just play a Patchwork Automaton or a Null Rod. This is actually kind of an interesting spot. Because the only real reason I care about a Null Rod from this spot is if my opponent... So my opponent has all of their spells cost 1 less except for non-artifact spells. And we know that opponent's deck only includes Sapphire, Jet, and Lotus. So there's only one more spell that can possibly be in my opponent's deck that Null Rod turns off, and that's Black Lotus. Now, I thought it was fairly unlikely they had a Black Lotus, but obviously they just gushed. And so I kind of chose to play Patchwork Automaton because it would be a better way to make sure I have lethal on the next attack. Because I thought it was very low likelihood that the Null Rod does anything. So I ended up playing Patchwork here. My opponent draws a card down to 8. They have 9 cards in hand, which means they can jump this frog up to 10 damage. But that doesn't kill me, and they'll die on the swing back. And so my opponent plays Black Lotus, obviously, for punish me for not playing the Null Rod. But we still have a Lodestone in play. So they spend 2 of the mana on an Unable to Scream. So my Lodestone now doesn't do any damage, nor does it tax them. But this does make me feel a little bit happier about playing the Patchwork out because now I have more creatures that can threaten lethal. My opponent ponders, which still takes a damage off of Crawler, and then plays a tap land. And then from here, because I played the Patchwork out, which is an interesting thing, I actually have a lethal attack by playing Null Rod, Stonecoil Serpent, that kind of thing on my attacks here. Because they can block here, and they take 3 and go to 3. But by playing a Null Rod and by playing a Patchwork, I can get more damage in, and I can make sure they die. So, you know, we saw the downside of playing playing the Patchwork instead of the Null Rod because they can have the 1 Black Lotus. But then you see the upside in having another attacker. So, I'm not sure. Let me know which one you think is better. So here, I'm going to bring in Mindbreak Trap. I'm going to take out Stonecoil Serpent because I don't think it does anything particularly interesting. And then I'm going to bring in Dismember as an additional way to, like, battle with Frog. And I think that Null Rod against Lurrus Doomsday is, like, I guess they have baubles here. So maybe boarding out Null Rods is, like, a little worse. But I kind of would expect them to board out, like, some amount of baubles if they expected Null Rod. I just think, like, 4 Null Rod is probably not necessary. It might hurt us just as much as it hurts our opponent. It's not like they're like an artifact-based deck. So I decided to like trim on Null Rod, but I could see trimming on Metamorph instead. Here's a pretty nice hand because we have a lot of starting mana. We don't have any of like the premier hate pieces, but we do have Scrawling Crawler, which is something, and then we have the ability to not die right away with Mindbreak Trap. So I kind of like this hand. I don't mind this hand at all. Opponent leads with basic Ponder and Black Lotus again. So a lot of basic Black Lotus draws in this. And we have a Sphere Resistance. So I'm going to go with maximum Patchwork Automaton here. Patchwork into Emerald into Mana Vault. And then I have 4 mana. I can either play Crawler, Nettle Cyst, or Sphere Resistance. And notably, I can play it off of the Mana Vault. So I could technically still play Mindbreak Trap through Sphere Resistance. I chose here to play Sphere Resistance because I think it's just a little bit more impactful. Especially to make my opponent maybe use this Black Lotus. So my opponent does crack the Black Lotus and immediately plays Psychic Frog with the Black Lotus. And then gushes the 2 lands back, which I think is a little peculiar. You don't really want to gush your lands back against Sphere. But what I think they're thinking is maybe going all in on a Frog. That's probably the logic. So I don't draw any lands here. What I do draw is a Null Rod, which is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt my opponent. And I'm going to play a Scrawling Crawler, tapping out of Mindbreak Trap so that I have You know, this is at least a punish for attacking with Frog, a punish for drawing. We're just trying to clock as much as possible. Unfortunately, this patchwork is a 5/5, and then my opponent can pitch all the way up to 6/7. Stop it. 6/7 Psychic Frog. So they pitch all the way up to 7/8 Psychic Frog because they drew for turn, and then they make it fly. They hit me down to 12, and they draw a card and they go to 16. So they go down to 15 after we both draw a card. So I have to be careful here because Scrawling Crawler is giving them extra cards. The Frog gave them extra cards. So right now, this is a 7/8. And with the card they will draw for turn, they can go all the way to 10 damage. I'm at 12 with a Mana Bolt. I draw kind of a cool one here. I'm at 11 with a Mana Bolt. So I'll have to be able to untap my Mana Vault or something similar to that. And so what I chose to do here is just leave open Hardcast Dismember. I could also just play the Lotus and then pass. Then I can use Lotus and Emerald to untap the Mana Vault and attack and win. So I think the Lotus is just going to be enough no matter what. What I do choose to do here is attack, let them go all in on their Psychic Frog, and then I just dismember the Psychic Frog to save 5 life. I think, like I said, the Psychic Frog... Actually, it's only 9 damage right now. Maybe I miscounted somewhere along the way. Either way, I just -5 it and attack my opponent and win round 3. Onward to round 4. And this is one of the interesting spots I highlighted from the video. This is a Keeper Mole that I don't feel good about anymore. And I've won the die roll against my Lurrus revealed opponent, and my opponent's history is entirely Doomsday and Lurrus Doomsday with some blue-black Murktide. So I'm putting my opponent on Lurrus Doomsday, but they could theoretically be on any Lurrus deck, and that's where this hand has problems, because let's think about how this opener's hand. So our problem is we're weak on mana. Our best case scenario really is Ancient Tomb Sphere Resistance. Sphere Resistance gets forced. Opponent isn't on a Wasteland version of Lurrus, like Lurrus Doomsday. And then we untap, play Strip Mine, and Trinisphere. That's our best case scenario, because then we can still play 3 drops every turn with the Trinisphere in play. One of the worst case scenarios is Ancient Tomb Sphere Resistance, we get Wastelanded. Ancient Tomb Sphere Resistance, it resolves, and then we can't cast any of our 3 drops. We're forced to tempo with Strip Mine, and we don't draw enough lands to win. And I think, having looked back at this, talk with the Discord a little bit, I kind of wish I had mulliganed this hand. I think it's just a little bit too risky. It puts my opponent it relies too heavily on my opponent being on Lurrus Doomsday. And I think this hand is still very good against Lurrus Doomsday for what it's worth. I just think it's probably a little too much on the risky side. So, that's how I think. Let me know what you think about this hand. Keeper Mole against a Lurrus revealed opponent whose entire history is basically Doomsday decks. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this one. But I chose to keep it, and I think it's very reasonable to keep this, but I think if I had to go back, I would mull it. So my opponent, of course, does not on Lurrus Doomsday, and they immediately go Volcanic Island Mana Crypt, making my Sphere bad and putting me in a terrible spot. I do draw Tolarian Academy, but I can't play anything right away because I don't have 4 mana to play any of my 3 drops. So I decide I'd rather just risk it on a Strip Mine to try to hope my opponent doesn't have any blue mana to play their spells. Of course, my opponent immediately plays a Snow-Covered Island. I play Tolarian Academy, and I still can't cast anything. And then my opponent plays another blue land. And so now my opponent's holding open Mana Drain. I don't even have the mana to cast anything anyways. I finally draw a thing I can cast, a Stonecoil Serpent, and I want to cast this because then my Tolarian Academy will make an extra mana next turn. But at this point, my opponent has already established Urza Saga, Mana Crypt, double blue, and they just immediately mana drain my 2-drop, and I guess it's probably 3 mana, right? No, 2 mana. And use that mana to Gifts Ungiven. What they do is they just grab a bunch of Moxen so that they can play the Moxen out, grow the constructs, and play that way. So they do have... I just think about what can I draw from this spot. If my opponent doesn't have a land follow-up, drawing with Null Rod here would stop my opponent from getting a couple of things. Stuff like that. But my opponent does have a land drop here. We do draw a land to let us play the game, but it's kind of a little bit too late for that. I do consider playing a Scrawling Crawler here, just have something that pushes forward, but I'm not really going to be able to beat these two like 6/6 constructs. My opponent is at 13. They've lost a couple mana crypt triggers at least, but you know, with Tolarian Academy and 4 Moxen, resolving stock ups, Lurrus, bring back Lotus, I have on a little bit of nothing here. I do draw Workshop Soul Ring, so like good draws from the Crawler here to try to get me out of this, but my Soul Ring immediately gets mental misstepped, so then I'm dead on board. So unfortunate, like I think maybe a bad mulligan to start, leading me to being just too far behind to really play with versus Mana Crypt. I don't exactly know how I want to board against Sean's Lurrus Breach deck. It's not actually Sean's version. I think my opponent is on the Discover End version, which is a little less blue-centric, a little bit more, I would say, like, curbed and well-rounded, whereas I think Sean's is, like, more powerful and more pointed, if that makes any sense. And so what I chose to do is I don't think Stonecoil Serpent does anything super amazing here. I'm going to bring in Ley Lines to shut off the Breach, Gifts, Graveyard stuff, and I'm going to bring one of the cages in so that I can tutor for it with Saga, but I'm not really particularly... I don't particularly love Grafdigger's Cage in the same way. It's going to get hit by all the artifact removal that my opponent may or may not have, like a Braid. Whereas Leyline, the opponent just basically has to bounce it or play like a long controlling game, which they can do. Like they're not, Leyline's not any kind of like lights out, anything lights out, but it's certainly worthwhile. So we board in the Ley Lines. I board out some of the Metamorphs that are compounding. Sorry, I board out some Metamorphs and some Stonecoil Serpents. I choose on the play not to bring in my Big Trap. In my opinion, the Gifts Breach deck is more of a control deck than anything else. And although it has combo elements, I don't know that Mindbreak Trap is particularly good, especially not on the draw. I don't want to like gum up my deck too much with Ley Lines and Mindbreak Traps and end up in a spot where I'm not powerful enough. So I chose not to bring those in on the play. Here I have an interesting hand that has a lot of fast mana and artifacts, but no lands. But I like the idea of Lotus, Automaton, Mox, Crawler. I feel like it's very... Oh, I didn't do that? I don't know why I didn't do that. Maybe I felt like it was less likely to be countered or something. That mean this is just missing out on 2 points of Automaton. I guess the upside here is that something good didn't get Mindbreak Trapped. I mean, the Patchwork got Mindbreak Trapped. I don't know why I did this. But the upside here is my Patchwork got Mindbreak Trapped, which let me resolve my Lotus and resolve my Crawler. So kind of an interesting set of sequencing there. I don't think it was right of me to do that. If I had gone Lotus, Patchwork couldn't be Mindbreak Trapped, I would go Mox, and then I'd play Crawler, and my Crawler would be Mindbreak Trapped. And that's actually a lot worse for me. But I don't know that I'm supposed to be really playing around Mindbreak Trap from here. Notably, my opponent, I don't know what happened in this game exactly, but my opponent kept, they mulled to 5, no, they mulled to 6 and Mindbreak Trapped me. And then I went to their turn and they just didn't have a land. So I don't really know what was going on there. But I gave them an extra card with Scrawling Crawler, so maybe not the best thing that I could do, and immediately played a Sphere, which got negated. So I think my opponent kept like a very counter-heavy hand. Maybe they had negation and they had trap on turn 1, and they chose to trap Patchwork, and then they didn't. Once they didn't negate Lotus, they couldn't negate Crawler because I still hadn't played a land yet. So they, I could be following up with Workshop Trinisphere, something like that. But opponent then doesn't have a land on the 3rd turn, and at that point, I'm like really pulling ahead. I get to play Nettle Cyst, and I get to play Scrawling Crawler, and I have a huge overwhelming board, and I win. So I'm not exactly sure what that one was. Maybe just the consequences of mulliganing and keeping maybe a sketchier hand. I do, on the draw, decide that I might want to change it up and put some amount of Mindbreak Traps in the deck. I was thinking like taking out some Metamorphs and maybe the Chalice on 0. I don't know that I really like that very much. I think in the end I chose to keep a Metamorph and played 2 traps and cut the Chalice, but that doesn't really seem right to me. I'm not really sure. I'll have to go back and think more about like how to approach this matchup, because it's kind of an odd one. It's a big mana deck, but it's not a combo deck really. It's kind of controlling. It's quite hard to see. So here I have a very nice hand opening Leyline with 3 mana to play any variety of pieces here. I like this hand a lot. Opponent leads on tap land and mills a Force of Will. And then I'm just going to slam Trinisphere because it doesn't get easier to resolve this once my opponent starts mana draining and that kind of thing. And it does almost win the game on the spot by putting on the stack. So just making my opponent have the force here. They do have negation pitching stock up. And then they're following that up with Ancestral Recall. So at this point, I'm like, oh man, I think I'm in trouble here. I don't know that this is going to be a game I can really win. But they play an Underground Sea here, and I go for Patchwork. Kind of just like a little bit of a consign bait, see what I can draw out. Patchwork is actually quite reasonable against my opponent's deck. They don't have like the best ways to remove it. It's a nice little low costing threat, so I don't mind putting it on the stack here. And they do think about it for quite a long time, though I don't know if it's like a double Q or something like that. And I did get the consign out from underneath them, which means I can go City and I can play Crawler. And I think Crawler is like a pretty nice threat against my opponent's deck because they don't play like as many 1-for-1 answers because they're doing more of this gift strain stuff instead of, you know, like Lurrus PO is going to play Swords and Abrade and Flame of Anor, and that's not going to be inside of this Breach deck. So I do resolve Crawler. My opponent has a Mana Crypt, which is quite scary from this spot as well. And they Lorien Revealed for a basic island and resolve a stock up. So my opponent has a lot of action here between all of this. They have 5 cards in hand after this, and then 4 cards after the snow-covered island, and then a 5th card after I give them a card. I do immediately rip Strip Mine and a Vexing Bauble. So now I have to figure out exactly what I'm looking for in this. And when I go and I look at the Discover End list, which is the list I think my opponent has copied, not the Sean list, I see that it has 4 consigns. And I really don't want to get consigned here. But it's hard for me to take them off of blue because I lose my city and I have to strip mine them like pre-combat. So I kind of tank for a long time here on which set of plays I want to do. And I do think I want to strip mine them pre-combat and like resolve my Nettlecyst through a consign. So what I choose to do is put a Vexing Bauble on the stack, which resolves, and then play Strip Mine and Strip Mine their basic. Now, Strip Mining their basic means I'm not wastelanding them off of black, which means I'm not landing them off of Lurrus, so like there's some downsides to this as well. But by doing this, I can at least ensure that I'm not getting consigned. And so post-combat, after attack, I do play my Nettlecyst, so I have a very reasonable clock now. Of course, the Mana Crypt does not deal any damage. And we go through this turn. I'm looking at the other 3-0s. And they have a Soul Ring, so they have lots of mana. And if they drew Soul Ring for turn, it means they didn't play it last turn, and they definitely have a consign, or something like a consign. And if they drew it for turn, then obviously it just means they drew it for turn. They cast Demonic Tutor. And then they pass. They pass without playing a land, and they cast Demonic Tutor. So my opponent has their tutor target, and they have Scrawling Crawler, and they're at 14, and I have 8 power in play plus Scrawling Crawler triggers. This, I think, is a kind of an interesting spot. I have a Wasteland pre-combat, again, from my Scrawling Crawler. I can Wasteland this Sewers to at least keep them off of, like, Consign and Lurrus, and obviously they didn't play a land last turn, so I'm trying to hit their mana as much as possible. So I lead with Wasteland on Sewers. And then this is kind of an interesting spot where my opponent responds with Chain of Vapor on my Leyline of the Void. So now I have some... This is one of the spots I brought up in the Discord. I have some options. At first, I thought I'd have some options in terms of stacking and replaying Chain. And why would I think I have that? Well, I kind of like the idea of maybe bouncing Mana Crypt so they can't replay it if I keep a Bauble in play. Or even just bouncing Soul Ring so they don't have as much mana next turn after they get Wastelanded. But one thing I don't know that I recognized in the moment was that the Wasteland is still on the stack with the Chain on the stack. So if I were to bounce this, they could then sack the land that's getting sacked to Wasteland and bounce something else. So like, terrible idea. Don't do that. So once you get through that portion, you go, okay, if my opponent is bouncing my Leyline and they're not bouncing one of the damaging things, that means that you're going to try to win the game on the next turn. What does that mean? And so do I want to play a Sphere Resistance and have Sphere Resistance Bauble in play, which don't really interact well with each other, but also pumps my Nettlecyst one? Or do I want to not play Sphere Resistance, just leave open Bauble, that's it, and try from there? And I don't actually know the answer. I think I may have chosen the wrong one. We have to also think about my opponent has that 13 life. Right now they're taking 8, and then on the draw they're taking 9. And with the Mana Crypt, they could be taking 12, putting them to 1. However, if I play the Sphere Resistance, they're going to be taking 9, and then they're going to be taking 1, and then they could be lose a mana crypt flip, and then they could die. So I think I tank for a long time here because I think it's probably the most important, most interesting part of the thing. So the question is, okay, we've established that I don't actually bounce anything with this chain. Do I play Sphere Resistance or not? Oh, sorry. I forgot that also Leyline of the Void is an enchantment, so it getting bounced shrinks my Germ token. So now if I play Sphere Resistance, I do 8, I do 9, and I can't actually get there. So it's actually really, really rough. But I did choose to play the Sphere to get in for 8, to do the 1, and then of course my opponent did not lose the mana crypt flip. So then it's just like, can they kill me through Vexing Bauble and Sphere? And they can kill me through Sphere with like different combinations of breaches and lotuses and that kind of thing. So like and fetch lands for red and that kind of thing. And there's a lot of complicated lines from here. I don't actually know that playing, like, I don't know which is better, having Vexing Bauble and Sphere in play where, you know, my opponent won't be like going breach, bounce one of them and still have the other one, or if just having Vexing Bauble in play so my opponent can't play Black Lotus is more important. That might be the case. I mean, they did Demonic Tutor, but I think they probably Demonic Tutor for Chain, possibly. So it's a little hard to say, because if they had Chain before, they would have just done this Leyline bounce before. So I don't know. So let me know what you think. If you would rather have a Sphere Resistance in play here, or just have a Vexing Bauble, because that's a kind of at least a contestable point in the Discord. So they didn't have anything here, so it looks like they just die on the attack. But it was really scary and a pretty cool way to end up 4-0 in this last chance qualifier. And that brings us to the 5th and final round of this LCQ. Winner of this round will qualify for the Mox qualifier. Stupid names. Unfortunately, I am paired up against Maharu here. So basically there were 3 4-0s. So one of the 3 4-0s would get paired down, probably get the auto scoop in from the opponent and make it to the qualifier. Unfortunately, the other 2 will have to play it out for the final spot. And I got paired up against Maharu, which I think is a really tough matchup. Obviously a MTGO end boss. And I know that she's going to be on Jeskai PO. She has her version of my Jeskai PO deck, which is like 2 Hexing Sculptures main, no Surveil land, some of Braids, a couple little tweaks, but at its core, it's still just my patented Jeskai PO deck, and she's been doing very well with it, lots of top 8s and things like that. Unfortunately, I also lost the die roll. I won a lot of die rolls today, but this was a bad match to lose the die roll for as well. And here we go with round 5. Obviously, this hand is a mulligan, not enough mana to cast our spells. This hand is quite good, though. Chalice, Vexing Bauble, Null Rod, and keep a Nettle Cyst with Ancient Tomb Saga. Unfortunately, like I said, I'm not on the play. If I was on the play, I would feel extremely good about this. I could lead with Chalice, see if it gets countered, play Vexing Bauble off of Saga or Ancient Tomb, then play a Null Rod. Like, it would have been a great opener on the play, but unfortunately, we're on the draw. My opponent gets to probe me, see my hand. She knows exactly what she's dealing with hate piece wise, and goes Sapphire, Soul Ring, Academy, 2 mana, or Academy, 4 mana, PO for 2, Emerald, Soul Ring, Sapphire, by Lurrus. So extremely high power opener. I have some options here on what I can do, but in the end, I just have to do like the most impactful thing possible. So I cast my Chalice on 0, and then I tank and play Ancient Tomb Null Rod to try to hope that at least I can, stop my opponent from going off with more POs on the following turns. And the Null Rod does resolve, which is good, but my opponent does still have Tolarian Academy plus Tarn, and we are still in a huge world of problems. Patchwork is a nice little draw, though, because it lets me use my full mana here, so I can go Patchwork, Saga, Vexing Bauble, and then my opponent responds by casting Flame of Anor on 1 mode, killing Null Rod, and opening up all of her mana. And because she opened up all of her mana with that Flame of Anor with 1 mana floating, she has 5 mana and hard cast a Force on my Vexing Bauble. So now my opponent has 9 mana, and I have an Urza Saga, a Patchwork, and a Chalice, and I'm just hoping and praying that's enough. Lantern is a quick, easy rebuy, and then a pass. I'm like, okay, well, pass is good. I'm not going to put anything on the stack here that just gets forced, so I'm just going to use my Urza Saga. And then, unfortunately, my opponent rips an Ancestral Recall off the top. If she doesn't rip that, maybe I have a chance. But after ripping Ancestral Recall off the top, there's very little chance of getting in this game. So after that, she goes in the tank for a little while and then casts a full X is equal to 7 4th Air Lingas. This is 14 damage. I'm at 16, and playing an Urza Saga is going to put me to 14. So it will be a lethal attack if I don't make any blocks. I have a 3/3 though, so I can attack. I can block here. I think my opponent makes a slight miscalculation here. If she has a force, then it's fine. If she doesn't have a force, I actually can win this game if she attacks all. If she attacks with just like 6 of these and does 12 damage or does 10 damage, I think that's better. Leaving a blocker back here means it's just like less ways I can win. But she thinks about it for a little while and then attacks with all. So I'm like, okay, sweet. I actually have a way out here. I make a block. She draws a card, and we go to my turn, where I currently have 5 damage against her 12. But I have a Nettlecyst in hand that can equip. So I draw an Ancient Tomb. I float my mana with Saga. I get a Mana Vault. And now I have 4 mana, 6 mana, 8 mana. But I can't tap any of these Ancient Tombs. So I only have 4 mana. If this Ancient Tomb was... like a workshop, then maybe I can win this game on the spot. If this ancient was a workshop, me just playing Crawler Serpent right now is 10 damage, and she's at 12. So if I can resolve one more spell, one more artifact for turn, I would actually be able to attack for 12 and win. So that's not even with Nettlecyst equipped. That's just with casting things. So like this is going to be very much, the opponent could have maybe left back a attacker, a blocker here. I don't have enough to leave back and block her, unfortunately. So, regardless, this attack is going to kill me. But so yeah, if I just draw like a workshop here, I actually have a lethal attack, which is pretty crazy. Actually, even with like if this is a workshop and this is a Nettlecyst, the triggers my Patchwork even on the stack. If she forces it, it's -1 life, and this is still actually 11 damage. So like, it's so close. It's just unbelievably close to a lethal here. And sadly, it's just short. And we have to go to game 2. And so we go to game 2. I choose to bring in some Mindbreak traps and take out some Metamorphs. I bring in an extra Stonecoil Serpent, so I have more things that have protection from flame. And then I have this hand, which is a Mindbreak trap, but light on hate pieces, light on mana. It has a Patchwork to lead off on, but not much else after. And I decided to put it back. I don't know that that's correct. I could go like, Patchwork into Patchwork, 0 mana Stonecoil. I just don't think it's like, with like Null Rods and all the hate pieces in my deck, I feel like this hand is not as strong as I'd like it to be. And I don't know that this trap is always going to be good. So I choose to put it back, and I get rewarded with this hand, which I think is quite nice. A Chalice is a nice effective hate piece. Lodestone Golem can help go over the top, and I think it's pretty good. So I do some math on how much mana I have and decide, which card I'm putting back. And so I put back the Mana Vault, and I go Emerald, Chalice on 0, resolves, Soul Ring resolves, Lodestone Golem with 1 mana floating, gets forced. So my opponent pitched a stock up to that force. And then she plays a land and passes, so you can see my Mindbreak trap wouldn't have been very good. And I get to go with Nettlecyst, and my opponent does it again, force pitching stock up. So I play my Wasteland out, and my opponent has 3 cards left and 2 lands, and Time Walks. And so then I have to choose whether or not to Wasteland my opponent, and I want to Wasteland my opponent because I don't want my opponent to get up to Flame of Anor mana. It's not likely she's going to have stock up because she already used 2 stock ups to this Force of Wills, but I think it's worth it to make sure she doesn't have a land on her Time Walk. And of course, I get instantly punished by her playing Urza Saga. Then I draw a land. She has more lands anyways, so now her Urza Saga is online. I do draw one of my best possible cards here. I think my best draws are Mystic Forge and Scrawling Crawler to try to get back. So I do have a Scrawling Crawler at least, but my opponent is now making constructs, getting mana with Soul Ring, Lorien Revealing for a land, and playing a Thundertrap Trainer, getting a Mox, which at least is dead to Chalice, so not a great draw there. But 2 constructs are in play, so my opponent has a dead card in their hand and 1 unknown, and still has access to Lurrus, and I have a Scrawling Crawler. I take a nice draw of a Wasteland here, can cut my opponent off red. I know her deck is a little bit more red heavy, so it's kind of nice to do. I don't really want to get Flame of Anor here. If I get Flame of Anor here, I would lose on the spot. So I will play a huge 9/9 Stonecoil Serpent and Wasteland my opponent's Volcanic Island. and then we're stuck for a little while. My opponent casts Stock Up, which surprises me because my opponent has already exiled 2 Stock Ups, but sometimes you have 3 Stock Ups in your top 18. And so that's a really bad sign for me. My opponent's going to find the things she needs to play the game. And of course, my Scrawling Crawler is still going off, giving her extra cards. So I get a nice attack in here with a 9/9 Stonecoil Serpent, which actually hits. So my opponent goes down to 4. And then I play another Scrawling Crawler with a backup of Vexing Bauble. So my opponent actually is at 4 life, and I have 2 Scrawling Crawlers. So they're going to go to 2 on this turn. So I'm like, well, maybe I can actually win this game. But that was not to be. So my opponent plays red land, Hexing Squelcher, which lets her play Mox in through Chalice and Vexing Bauble. So I decided to wait. I can crack this bauble looking for one of my Mindbreak traps, so that's why I was considering doing that. My opponent actually plays a second red Saurus with Mox Ruby, which I don't know if that's the Mox we knew about. I don't think it's the Mox we knew about. Emerald was the one we knew about. And then slams over the top, Flame of Venor, killing Crawler and Crawler. Destroy artifact, deal 5 damage. This is a really, really bad spot because now that she played Hexing Squelcher, her Moxen make these constructs big enough to double block this Serpent and make me a sad Justin. So I crack my Vexing Bauble looking for a Mindbreak trap. I don't find a Mindbreak trap, and everything resolves, and my opponent Merchant Scrolls. And I was surprised she didn't Merchant Scroll for PO. And what she does is she Merchant Scrolls for Force of Negation, which is actually quite a smart one here. If I draw a Nettle Cyst, I might have the ability to like Nettle Cyst equip and put down I don't know if it's a lethal attack, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 14, 14. It's like just short of a lethal attack, but it's going to kill everything and put us in a winning position. So I draw Sphere, which is just going to resolve because it doesn't matter at this point, and my opponent's going to untap and cast the 4th Stock Up in the top half of the deck, unfortunately. And after this Stock Up resolves, I feel like I'm in a really unwinnable spot. I cast Null Rod, which does take the Force of Negation, and we're just waiting to find my opponent to find a PO and kill us. And opponent finds a PO, and then we are super far behind. However, we get to this spot where opponent taps out into Sphere Resistance. So in this spot, a Nettle Cyst is 6. It's a 15/15, and this is 13. This is 12, 14, 16. Okay, so Nettle Cyst even doesn't do it in this spot. And what I do is I draw a Saga, and then I am very, very dead. 4th Airlingus for 7, and we die. And so unfortunately, at the end of this, we got 4 wins in a row with a deck we never intended to play, almost all the way to the end, just to face Maharu on our classic Jeskai PO deck and lose and miss out on the Mox. So I'm recording this voiceover on Tuesday. I've already played a second LCQ on the Tuesday. The second LCQ, I registered Lurrus PO, and I got immediately beat round 1 by Black Dex on Dredge. So that's 2 of my 3 bullets. I have 1 more left in me. I will do a recording of the 7 p.m. one tonight. It's going to be my last LCQ bullet, where I'll have to go 5-0, or I will miss the Mox qualifier this year again. It is what it is. It's a hard event. These LCQs are extremely hard to win. The showcases are extremely hard to top 8. This LCQ field was one of the toughest fields I've ever seen. It was 45 players, and it was all like grinders and top level players and people who care about winning. So really awesome event. Got to do some really cool games and some really cool practice, and did a good deal of winning, even if I fell short just at the end. And so I think the LCQ tonight I will probably maybe record in the same way, where I record it off stream with no voiceover, and then I do a retrospective redubbing over it afterwards. These redubbings are always a little interesting. They're definitely going to be shorter, and I'm definitely kind of speed talking and speeding my way through it. Let me know if you like this kind of content in comparison to the more stream of conscious live stream content. I think the last time we did this, the answer was generally that people liked it less, but it was nice and like a kind of a different kind of change. So, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of differences here and there in the way the content is presented. And still, obviously, we're going to get some things we don't get on the live stream in terms of retrospective in terms of analyzing plays and that kind of diverging lines. You get a little bit more, I think, from looking back, but then you also lose, you lose the cam, you lose the instant reaction, you lose the all the kinds of like fun and more entertaining parts of the content, and you end up with very dry, very analytical content. So like I said, let me know how you enjoyed this video in the comments. If you want me to do more of these in the future, I think we'll do at least one more if I would do another LCQ. So it is what it is. One more chance to qualify for the mocks, or that's it for me for the only section of MTGO, high stakes vintage for the year. Hopefully we can get it in the last one. More content on this YouTube channel every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'll see you then.